Summertime is get back to clean time for Stanley Steamer. We clean it all: tile and grout, carpet, upholstery, area rugs, wood floors, and air ducts. Call today at 1-888-STEEMER, because it's not clean till it's Stanley Steamer clean.
Hi everyone, I'm Jacinthe Galpin, and you're listening to the Risktory podcast. Coming up on this week's Master of the Risk Universe episode, Martine Rothblatt. Martine Rothblatt isn't a household name when it comes to disruption and innovation, but she really ought to be. The world's first private international spacecom project, PanAmSat. She not only wrote the thesis that acted as the genesis for the idea, she launched it. The world's first global satellite radio network, WorldSpace. She created it. The world's first non-geostationary satellite-to-car system, Sirius Radio, the Sirius Radio. She invented it. And when her daughter was diagnosed with pulmonary arterial hypertension, and her daughter was given just months to live, Martine invested her own money to develop treatments that transformed not just her daughter's life, but the lives of thousands around the world. And she's still going, most recently launching the world's first net zero office building, which is powered by a range of technologies, including solar power, geothermal walls, and electrochromic glass, and which operates with zero carbon footprint. On this week's episode of the Risktory podcast, I'm going to explore the life and times of a disruptor who was considered to be one of the greatest, and in my opinion, one of the most underrated and under-recognised minds of the last century. And I'm going to talk about 3 traits that I believe all disruptors and innovators, including Martine Rothblatt, possess. 3 traits that distinguish them from the population at large. Before I begin, I did want to mention that Martine Rothblatt is a transgender woman. She was born a biological male and began transitioning in the early 1990s. I mention this only because early in the episode there is a quote referring to Martine as him, and referring to Martine using her male Hebrew name. And I didn't want there to be any confusion and/or a perception that I was misgendering Martine. Martine Rothblatt was born in 1954 in Chicago, Illinois, to Rosa Lee, a speech therapist, and Hal Rothblatt, a dentist. Within days of Martine's birth, Rosa Lee believed that her child was destined for greatness. Quote, "I was walking back and forth in the living room and I was holding him like a football. And I remember saying, 'Menash, honey,' that's his Hebrew name, 'I don't know what it is, but there's something special about you. You will make a difference in this world." End quote. As a child, Martine was a voracious reader and learner, blessed with a rare curiosity to know everything about the world. Rosa Lee has stated that Martine would spend summers immersed in books such as Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, which is impenetrable at the best of times, any book by Isaac Asimov, the writer and biochemist, and Black Like Me by John Howard Griffin. From German philosophy to a hard-hitting tome about racism in the Deep South, this is the mind of a disruptor. A mind hungry for knowledge, for ideas, the mind of someone seeking something more than average childhood intellectual fare. And this is key trait 1 of the disruptors. Think about Edison, Tesla, Gates, Jobs, Bezos, Apgar. All had childhoods punctuated by a voracious need to know stuff. They were constantly testing and stretching their mental capacity even as children, driven by what I consider to be a disruptive mind that never truly goes to sleep. Further, this voracious need was either supported and/or enabled by parents who recognised in their children a certain something that separated them from the rest. So you think about how Jeff Bezos' single mum, bless her heart, let him steal her pots and pans to create a makeshift security system. or how Steve Jobs' dad set up an electronics workshop in the family garage, or how Virginia Apgar's father built a lab in the family's basement so that she could do experiments. Martine, I have no doubt, benefited from a childhood that facilitated her capacity and willingness to learn, and she was fortunate to have parents who encouraged that learning. Martine entered UCLA but dropped out in freshman year to see the world, embarking on what many would now call a gap year. Road travel through Europe, teaching English in Iran, touring through East Africa. Eventually, Martine wound up in the Seychelles Islands, which Martine had heard was paradise. Unfortunately, paradise it wasn't. Cockroaches would cover the floor of Martine's hut like a carpet at night, and if Martine turned on the light, locusts and moths would fly in through the windows. But every situation, however dire, always has a silver lining. Martine's friend, who was working at an Air Force base tracking NASA satellites, invited Martine for a visit. What happened next was an epiphany. Quote, "It was like we had stepped into the future. Everything was crisp and clean. It seemed to me the satellite engineer was making the whole world come together, like that was the centre of the world." End quote. Martine almost immediately departed the Seychelles Islands, re-enrolled at UCLA, and graduated summa cum laude in communication studies in 1977, before going on to complete a Juris Doctor and MBA at UCLA, with a focus on satellite communications. It was during this time that Martine wrote an MBA thesis on PanAmSat, focusing on how satellite spot beam technology could be used to deliver disparate communication services, from entertainment to news to telecommunications to the burgeoning internet. From Charlie Firestone, an adjunct professor and former teacher of Martine, quote, "The most brilliant student I had in 13 years of teaching at UCLA Law School. Just a fascinating mind," end quote. Post-UCLA, Martine moved to Washington, having been hired by the law firm Covington and Burling. Martine quickly developed a reputation in the early 1980s as a regulatory genius, particularly when it came to FCC regulations, direct broadcast satellites and spectrum. From one former colleague, Tony Marzuk, quote, "A conceptual genius. Her ideas were quantum leaps of the technology of the time," end quote. It wasn't just Martine's understanding of satellite technology, or even Martine's understanding of the law, both of which made her best in class. What made this period of Martine's post-college life so interesting, and this is a key trait number 2 of the disruptors, was Martine's almost freakish capacity to accurately predict what the future might hold, the implications, the unknown, the risk, and translate that knowledge into practical, tangible, and profitable action. It required Martine to understand the existing environment of communications in the US, map out how that environment might morph and shift over a prolonged period, map out potential responses to that morph and shift, and then advise on a course of action to be taken to maximise the yield. This was, and still is for that matter, next-level risk wrangling. And it's what all disruptors do. Driven by either a willingness or compulsion to embrace the fact that humans can and do possess the capacity to influence and shape the unknown through action, they take leaps of faith seemingly without fear, because they can, and because they've reconciled in their minds that they might lose, but they also might win, which is just how good risk management works. In 1984, Martine was given the opportunity to launch PanAmSat, the focus of her UCLA thesis, which broke an existing monopoly on international satellite communications, and which opened up a whole new world of fast, reliable global information dissemination. Following the success of PanAmSat, Martine launched GeoStar, a car navigation system using, you guessed it, satellite technology to guide vehicles from destination to destination. Those lovely sat-nav systems we use today in our cars? Martine pioneered the technology. Despite investors, satellite experts, and even the FCC all believing the idea would not work. In 1990, Martine launched WorldSpace, a radio satellite network that, at its peak, had 175,000 subscriptions worldwide. Quite the feat when you think that this was 1990 and that dial-up was considered cutting-edge technology. Martine also launched at this time Sirius Radio, hoping to take advantage of unused or underutilised frequencies, as well as GPS-style antennas for digital audio. Sirius disrupted everything, from the use of satellite technology to the ongoing viability or lack thereof of car cassette and later car CD players, to the idea of portable technology. Martine had found momentum in disruption. Using technology and with her expert understanding of the communications environment, she was able to deftly navigate a burgeoning and rapidly evolving space with ease. By the early 1990s, Martine was a millionaire, and life was good. And then life became not so good. Martine's 7-year-old daughter, Jacinthe, was diagnosed with pulmonary arterial hypertension, for which there was and still is no cure. In 1990, the prognosis for those diagnosed with the condition was just 2 years. The most effective therapy available was a drug called Flolan, owned by pharmaceutical behemoth GlaxoSmithKline, which had to be administered intravenously, 24 hours a day through a pump. It was inconvenient, difficult to access, and expensive. Martine, driven by love for her daughter, launched into action. She turned her back on Sirius and WorldSpace and the world of communications entirely. Quote, "I felt like my only purpose in life now was not to help move to the stars with satellites and stuff like that. It was to save Genesis. So I just stopped everything I was doing." End quote. Martine pivoted into becoming an advocate for Genesis. Selling what she could and raising $3 million in the process, she launched into exploring options that would save Genesis. And she discovered through research a safer and more accessible alternative to Flolan. And that was great, that was awesome. Only problem was that this molecule was owned by GlaxoSmithKline, who were not keen to commercialise the drug because, well, they didn't need to. They didn't need to cannibalise Flolan. What happened next? Well, let's hear it from Martine. Quote, "I did go to Glaxo and they told me no, but I'm a person who likes to hear why something can't be done, and I'll whittle down every one of the can'ts, one at a time. The last time I went, the head of development told me that his sister had just been diagnosed with pulmonary arterial hypertension, and he said he could not persuade the head of Glaxo to develop this drug, even for his sister, because it was such a small orphan population of people. But he would become my champion, because he was convinced I was going to die or get this drug developed. He collected 15 signatures from executives and I got the drug, and we got it approved." End quote. Martine would go on to found United Therapeutics, and with that molecule, which has now been renamed Remodulin, tens of thousands suffering from pulmonary arterial hypertension are benefiting. No pump, just tablets. Accessible, less expensive than Flolan, and if a patient can't afford the drug, United Therapeutics provides it for free. Currently, United Therapeutics has an estimated market value of just over $5 billion. And just for the curious, Genesis, the young girl who started it all. She's now in her 30s, reasonably healthy, albeit she still has the condition and always will, and is working for United Therapeutics, the company that was founded for her. What this episode in Martine's life shows, and this is key trait number 3 for the disruptors, is how the disruptors can pivot, shift, and succeed. Disruptors like Ray Kurzweil, Madonna, both of whom I've featured on the podcast, and I'll leave links to their episodes in the show notes, and Martine. A lack of technical knowledge does not act as a barrier to entry for disruptors. Because their core competence, their wheelhouse, their true talent, it isn't the technical, although that's often how their disruption most openly manifests. Their true talent is the ability to disrupt an existing space and transform it into something different, regardless of industry or subject matter or precedence. And they're able to pivot and shift because they have an understanding and mastery of risk and the unknown. Martine wasn't a biomedical expert, but she was a disruptor who knew she could turn her head and hand to anything. And that's what she proceeded to do with Remodulin and the founding of United Therapeutics. From United Therapeutics, Martine has begun to move into more and more diverse disruption, such as the launch in 2016 of the world's first electric-powered helicopter, and as I mentioned, zero-carbon footprint buildings. And yes, there are some more esoteric innovations, such as Martine's push for human immortality through embedding our brains into a robot body, or her work with genetically modified pigs whose organs, it is hoped, can be transplanted into human bodies. I'm not sure there isn't a space Martine wouldn't disrupt and innovate if she was so inclined. She has proven over a now 40-year career a demonstrated ability to solve problems and offer up solutions to questions we haven't even countenanced, let alone asked. And while I do find some of Martine's work challenging, I'm not going to lie, I'm not sure how I feel ethically about pigs being used for no other reason than organ production, to be honest. I still remain fascinated with her disruption. There is a fearlessness to how Martine Rothblatt thinks, a human-centric focus on how she incubates and develops. And there is always a pragmatic, reality-based value in the work that she does. Her outputs make a difference in human evolution, and that's important. Why people like Martine Rothblatt matter, for risk practitioners, is that she lives our discipline the way it ought to be lived. Risk management is all about seeing off threat, exploiting opportunity. And when you look at Martine Rothblatt, that's what she's been doing her entire career. Martine Rothblatt is a disruptor, an innovator, and she is indeed a visionary master of the risk universe. Thanks everyone for tuning into today's episode of the Risktory podcast. Tell me, who are your favourite underrated disruptors and innovators? Let me know and I might include them in a future Masters of the Risk Universe episode. If you enjoy listening to the podcast, then please consider subscribing. You can find the podcast on your usual podcast platforms, including iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. New episodes are released every Monday, 6:30 a.m. US Eastern Time. If you want to learn more about the podcast or access the back catalogue of episodes, then please head on over to the website at www.risktorypodcast.com. You can find Risktory on social media, Twitter at Risktory Podcast, and Instagram at the Risktory Podcast. If you want to contact me directly, then please reach out on LinkedIn, or you can always email me at Jacinthe at risktorypodcast.com. I'm Jacinthe A. Galpin. I love risk and I love history. You have been listening to Risktory.
Summertime is back to clean time for Stanley Steamer. We clean it all: tile and grout, carpet, upholstery, area rugs, wood floors, and air ducts. We've been in the business for over 75 years. We're a name you can trust. We're a locally owned franchise right here in your community. Call today at 1-888-STEEMER. Because it's not clean till it's Stanley Steamer clean.
Stanley Steamer.